Hello everyone, I'm Gemma Star. Welcome to another episode of Heart Warriors. This is a series I've been inspired and guided to do thanks to my energetic connection with Catituda, which is the sacred masculine site in Central Australia, very close to Uluru, which is the sacred feminine site. What I'm here to do is to give a platform to our men so they can share their journey into the heart, their highs, their lows, their challenges, their pains, for other men who are now walking the path into the heart, to hear and, to just share the experience and maybe take away some wisdom, knowledge, insights, tools, practices that these men who are here as guests on the show have picked up along the way to help them on their journey. My guest today is a man called David Stone. He's over there in the UK. He is into masculine, feminine polarity, ancestral healing, cellular awakening, inner union. So really excited to hear David's story and see what he can share with us. So enjoy the show. Hello, David Stone. Welcome to Heart Warriors.
Hello, Gemma Star. Great to be here.
Whereabout in the UK are you?
I'm just outside Glastonbury in Somerset.
Oh, that's a very special area.
Mm.
Oh, beautiful.
Very, yeah.
Yeah, wow, I imagine. So let's start as we always do. Let's get to know the man you are today. How would you describe yourself?
I describe myself as walking that edge between vulnerability and being real, and holding that in that grace of showing up as the man that I am. So it's a delicate edge for men to walk in that sort of way of being truthful and holding that vulnerability, not as something that you're just pouring out everywhere as you go along, but as a way of seeing truth and knowing that truth is powerful, and it's using it in a way that's service orientated and responsible. So my life is all about how do I bring the fullness of my being in a way that's going to uplift my relationships, going to be the most nourishing way of being in my life. So that's what I'm about.
I love it. And let's dig straight into vulnerability, because this is a topic that is thrown around a lot in the polarity community. There's one extreme that says men shouldn't be vulnerable. There's the other that says, well, hang on, what's your definition of vulnerability, especially masculine vulnerability? So can we start with your definition of masculine vulnerability? Is it different to feminine vulnerability? Let's open that discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always, when you work with this reality, there's always polarity, because that's what creates this friction. So for me, masculine vulnerability is twinned with agency. So agency for me is acting with action and intentionality. And then vulnerability is that openness of just beingness and the raw realness of who you are. And what I've experienced is both extremes. And you can almost get into play acting both extremes with the whole polarity discussion. So if you're in, say, the new age, and it's a very feminine construct of being, of opening, sharing, caring, and using that as your calling card for a relationship, it can become very saturating for a man. It can become very effeminizing. When you look at all the ways of culturally scoping your communication, like non-violent communication, it's all very soft and yin. There isn't the room for that rawness, the animal, the part of the masculine that just wants to dominate and ravage and also provide. It kind of neuters it. And then you look at the agency side, which is all about doing, which is all about activating, actualizing. And when that goes to the extreme of lacking that connection to the vulnerability and the softness and the feminine qualities, it becomes very robotic. It becomes very thrusting and hard without that lubrication, without that care, without that compassion for where others are at. And it's that balancing act. If you're trying to learn those as a fixed kind of way of being on top of your wounding, on top of deeper structural kind of issues, you're going to end up kind of creating a kind of cognitive system that helps you to cope with life, helps you create relationships, but you're never really getting into that messy, deep, lost place that so many people don't want to go. They shut it down and they create these systems, these polarity teachings, because it avoids the places where, hang on a minute, I'm meant to be a man and I'm all vulnerable and I'm stuck in this dank place where I'm messed up and I don't know where my power is. I can't find my agency. And yet I've got to show up as a man in life, got to earn money, take care of my responsibilities. And it creates a lot of kind of complex issues for people to wrestle with. So the easy way out is just to go into straight, black and white thinking. It just cleans it, puts it all under the carpet, all the mother wounds, all the father wounds. I've got a system that can give me order in the chaos. And I can really appreciate why it's so popular, this pop polarity, because it gives people a sense of power. They can be powerful in their masculinity, and women can be potent and magnetic in their femininity, in their surrenderedness, and everyone can play their part in this system. And it's not that isn't useful, it's because it becomes habitualized. Like anything, it's not presence sourced, it's system sourced. And so when you drop into those deeper places of your humanity, and then you strengthen the core and the rootlessness of where we're all trying to find rooting in the rootless, timeless, formless essence of who we are, that's the true test of something that will stand time and integrity. So that's my take on it all.
I love it. Is vulnerability just being real? Because when we put out our true selves, whether we're male or female, in our masculine or feminine, we put ourselves up for criticism, for insults, and we know it's an attack on our true selves. And so is it any time that we're in our authenticity that we are, to some extent, being vulnerable?
It's a really good question. I mean, look at this from several perspectives. I had a corporate career at one point, and even then they had go woke, go broke. When businesses were vulnerable about a core challenge, the press would seize upon it and destroy them and go, look at them. They're fucked. They're messed up. They've got this core issue. And actually they were being vulnerable and asking for help and really being honest. And so they went broke. They were kind of pummeled by it. And by the same token, what you find in social media, sometimes if you share something about yourself, it breaks this externalized image that people might have of you that holds you to some sort of standard. And I think you're hitting upon the actual core of the issue of vulnerability. What it does is it breaks down the dissonance between who you are inside and the image that others have made of you or you have created of yourself. And so if you think of the image of the male and then the real man inside and the real woman inside, vulnerability and being honest, or honesty, is the quickening of that gap, the reduction of that gap, so you can just break free into that freedom inside that can then match the, almost like, I'd call it the essence of your higher self and your lower self that are in here trying to come into marriage. And then this externalized matrix self that we almost get sucked into when we try and take part in life. It's not quite us who we feel inside, and that gap can get bigger and bigger. And so vulnerability is the fastest way to collapse that. And it's not always safe, it's not always appropriate, it's not always held or witnessed or welcomed, because it starts to corrode falsity. It starts to break apart systems that have become clunky and power hungry and source themselves by co-opting people's vulnerability, feeding off it to sustain the external images, the external systems. So vulnerability is a commodity as well.
Yeah.
So it's a multifaceted problem because it opens up the deepest connection to your source.
Yeah,
So
I guess the person who we are inside, who we identify and feel as, that changes through our healing journey as well. I mean, I look at myself 5 years ago and what I was sharing in my writing, being vulnerable. And, you know, now I can still be totally vulnerable, but, you know, I'm sharing something different. But what I'd really like to get into while we're at it, David, is you named this episode Vulnerability and Power. So let's talk about the power aspect. Where is the power in vulnerability?
for me, it aligns me to what's real inside me. And that's when I can come into my power. And there's almost something paradoxical about that, because it's not actually showboating as powerful. That actually that is the power. It's the sense of being real and genuine.
Yes.
That is the power.
Freedom,
and when the
right?
mind, that's where the freedom is.
Yes.
And that's when you get real, and that's when being fully yourself in that vulnerability starts to create a sense of who you are and who you're not. And when you know who you are and who you're not, you start to get a sense of where you end and where this reality begins outside of you, and where other begins. So you cease compromising yourself. You cease trading off your vulnerability for love or for success. You stop abandoning yourself, leaving yourself, or allowing shame to come in and corrode you, so that your vulnerability becomes your power. But it's that cultivation of that sacred chalice, that container, that's that unfolding journey of bringing your vulnerability out into the open, that helps you to define and then become stronger inside in your vulnerability and being it.
So could we exchange your definition of vulnerability with authenticity? Is it the same thing?
There was a big craze about authentic in personal growth about 10 years ago. I remember because I came through a corporate background into my personal growth work about 25 years ago. So I've always had, until about 5 years ago, a foot in both camps. I was involved in the corporate world and in the healing world. And people got obsessed with being authentic. And it became another straitjacket. In the same way that if you were always vulnerable without actually opening up to your agents, what I would call your agency, then you're just going to be a soppy mess. And in the same way, if you're always authentic, it's like you're bringing a kind of moralistic, having to be real all the time with everybody, and that in itself becomes turgid. So what we're talking about really is this ever-changing essence inside of you that you can't label, you can't pin down. It doesn't follow any rules. It's rootless, and it's like trying to find some sense of way of defining the undefinable. So it's that divine essence that can't be pinpointed.
Could we define it as following your heart instead of following your mind? Because I know when I'm authentic, you know, I have a heart expansion because maybe because in my feminine, I'm very aware of when I'm in my head and when I'm in my heart. So, you know, as you're talking, you know, and I'm relating it to my own experience, that's what I'm thinking. Okay, well, when I'm living from the heart is when I'm being authentic, because when I'm living my mind, oh, I should be doing this, or society says you should be doing that, or whatever. But when I'm free in my heart, which is the same energy as love, the heart energies, that could also be incorporated into vulnerability, authenticity? What do you think?
I think when you say living from my heart, I think that's different for everybody. As you're saying it, what's coming up, what I'm experiencing from you is your full presence.
Yeah.
And a broadening and an opening and a softening and the real you coming forwards through that place of your heart. So we're kind of using language to try and activate the brilliance, the beauty, the love. For you, it's love as a woman. And if you're trying to put that lens for men to come from their heart, it wouldn't quite fully fit some men.
Okay.
So it's quite personal as well. So again, it's about what's right for you, being true to yourself. For me, I have a natural fierceness that softens when a woman brings her heart into and her presence into the field. I start to know that it's safe to be less guarded, less assertive of myself.
That's very interesting, isn't it? Because it's a topic that's come up from different aspects during these Heart Warrior conversations. And I always feel that the feminine sort of had to heal the last 5 years on, I mean, it's not as a general rule, to allow this safety for the masculine to step into their authentic and at times vulnerability, so that they can heal as well. Because if we don't acknowledge what we've got inside, what needs to be healed, our wounds, how are we going to heal them and acknowledge them to him, not necessarily vomited on the woman, but you know what I mean? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it's coming into that deeper softening.
Yeah.
Whether it's in relation to a woman who's holding her space and feeling her and being in her own softness. And then that enables a man to come into his softness and his realness. And then he wants to bring the best of himself to her. And therefore, if he's in a regulated state, he can do that. A man can do that.
What do you think of this theory that I've had as well, that men, let's say a man is, we could say, wounded, because we all get wounded, and, he's on his healing journey, that so he's in his wounded masculinity, and then often he'll come into more of his feminine as he starts coming into awareness and healing and different modalities before stepping fully into his natural masculine place on the spectrum.
It's a kind of one of these archetypal ways of graduation, I guess, that there is an inevitable softening. There's an inevitable because men's emotions have been so crushed and so socialized out of them. It's almost like he's finding his emotions and he's learning to express them. And then when you move in the new age, that becomes the currency of connecting, is that if you can open up and if you can soften, and it's where a lot of men get lost, or they have a full experience of that. And then it's learning, well, how do I actually find more of my masculine qualities and strengthen those? And then there's that journey of inquiry that I've seen in some of your other videos with Ryan and other men, that they talk about this pendulum swing of going into the softening. And it was the same for me. I personally had profound awakenings into that connection with the divine. And so that took me out my body. And so I was very much in an impersonal place. And then I found my deeper wounding. And then that took me into a very softening place, and a sharing, caring place. And then wanting to actually enjoy my relationships with women, I found that when I was in that feminine openness and that feminine softness, it didn't actually activate that sexual charge, that kind of dynamic in relationships. It became like trauma bonding and very healing, but sort of it doused the sexuality. It kind of soaked it out of out of the relationship. And also it affects your determination. It affects your kind of charge to really make the best of yourself. If you're always softening and going into yin and going into surrender, it's a tough world out there. It's the survival of the fittest. It's very competitive. And it's how do you bring, as a man, that softening, heart-centered place is that stable strength within myself, which has been my challenge, and yet that steel, that fierceness, that warrior, that beast, those beast-like qualities, that sexual energy, and reconciling those and bringing them together so that there's enough room for that deliciousness and also the brokenness. Because I've got I've got so many broken places as well, that the more I'm real about them and I'm relational with others to share, that's a part of who I am. It allows it to kind of soften and heal when I can bring it into, rather than kind of like being punchy and dictatorial or aggressive or assertive in certain situations, as I speak that same place but vulnerably and ownership without making the other responsible for triggering it. It just elevates the relationship because it lifts the wound out of their ways of enmeshing into more elevated and healing and purified ways of coming into relationship.
Well, David, I want to get into the sexual polarity as well, but first I want to touch on what you said about masculine qualities. So can you first of all describe your definition of healthy masculine qualities, and maybe also let's touch on some of the what I would call wounded qualities, so we can get the difference between, for example, controlling is wounded, right? And the healthy version would be assertive. So can you touch on the wounded qualities and the healthy qualities of masculinity?
Can I go beneath that though? I mean, I'd like to go to the raw building block, which is that it's that raw animal drive that's deeper. It's like what I would call dark matter. It's like what you're made of. It's like your raw animalistic power, passion to just move through anything. And that could lend itself towards the wounded aspects like lust, addiction, if that gets inverted, sloth. We're talking basically about the 7 sins: jealousy, envy, greed, gluttony, all these qualities that are actually your power and that lend themselves to wounded lenses so easily. And yet, if we don't pathologize them as wounded, but we see them actually as traits of our power, then actually harnessing them becomes our gift, rather than trying to create a gift of like, oh, I'm so compassionate, oh, I'm really kind, and I'm getting into my provision to take care of my woman. Then you're trying to build a separate quality of strength that isn't wounding. You're trying to create a gift out of, without going back to your dark matter, to the raw, chaotic wounding, which might be collapsed and suppressed as illness, as a sense of powerlessness, or it could be in the addictive phase. So what my sense is that if you go back to the raw matter, then you've got the building blocks that are often the wounding. And it's working with the wounding rather than trying to invent the gift out of thin air.
To heal the wounding, is that what you mean? Yeah. Oh, definitely. And then in retrospect, we look back and see that the wounding was the greatest gift of all, because that's exactly what you said. We had the building blocks once we healed that, and we find love and freedom and all the other wonderful things.
Yes, stop working with systems that externalize us into building blocks outside of ourselves, and we come back to the raw matter within us, our own wounding, all the places that are messed up inside us. That actually gives us all the firepower to kind of transmute that like Mother Nature does into, compost, to then rely on that quality of Mother Nature and the turning of the wheel of the seasons to kind of regenerate ourselves into our gifts, into that higher version of ourselves.
From your experience, are men built differently than women for the way we heal our wounds?
Yes, I would say so. I think it gets very blurred because I work ancestrally, both I've worked with my own process and with many clients. And so a lot of females would take a male imprint off their father, or their mother would have been running a male imprint. And conversely, where the men have been absent, the men take an absent imprint from their father, or a masculinized imprint from their mother, or they become dominated by their mother. So when you're talking about, oh, men are this and women are that, it's not quite as clear cut as this, because men are often carrying identities from their mothers and fathers and their ancestors, as are women. So some women are actually carrying a male imprint in a female body. So it's all distorted and contorted. And so it's really weird to actually start to dissolve those imprints. And then you see the real, true essence of people, of a man or a woman, is fundamentally quite similar. But then the essence of your soul, of your higher self, that's actually is the first thing that comes before the body, is the blueprint, your eternal essence. And that's just unique to each person. There's no map. And then from that, the person kind of just intrinsically knows what's true, because they're not carrying mum or dad, these kind of imprints that we thought was our own expression of masculinity or femininity or the archetypes. So it's fascinating that each person then becomes this unique code of masculine and feminine qualities. So there is no kind of ideal map, but then there are ideals that are helpful, are signposts that shouldn't be used as kind of religious or ways to found our identity, but then you have something deeper to create your identity that isn't these kind of gender signposts, that goes deeper than qualities such as, oh, men do the provision and women do the emotions and do the the femininity. That's beautiful. Those are great signposts, but there's this deeper intrinsic dark matter, this force that I think makes it so much more exciting, because then you just don't know what's going to emerge. It's like it's allowing the genie out the bag for the unknown in relationship, both who you are growing beyond the relationship and within the relationship. So you're not defined by anyone else, but you can create these in relationship, we create these beautiful partnerships where we become better people together.
So true. And this is the reason, throughout this series that, I said I'm going to interview 100 men at least. And every man is so unique. And, we're talking about masculine men, but they're all so different. And this is what I love. There's the whole sort of spectrum. And so this beautiful reality is unfolding is there is no one definition for masculinity, and it's a beautiful thing that that I'm enjoying witnessing, and I hope the audience are too. And what was I? Oh, yes. So I wanted to ask you, David, if a man was watching this and he's like thinking, yep, I need to make some changes. I need to start healing something. I'm starting to become aware that I have childhood wounds, or I'm repeating patterns in relationships or whatever. Where does he start?
Well, I think it always comes back to the breath.
Oh.
Every single time. So when I work with someone, I'll listen to what's happening for them and we'll inquire, and we'll get a good picture, like we'll try and get a full picture of what the pain is. And then through questioning and going into those deeper feelings of the dynamics, I'll be starting to think, I'm starting to feel this is coming through the mother line, the father line. But the most direct route to that vulnerability that opens the doors to that higher knowing of who they really are, to realign back to the physical human, is the breath. So when people start to breathe and relax into their body, so you've got the breath, and then coming into the breath and locating the breath in the body, and then starting to invite in the true nature, their true essence, their infinite aspects, it starts to put pressure on what is not true, what isn't real. This is the way I've been working since I did a training as a Gestalt psychotherapist, and then as a training as a type of medium. And then for the last 7 years, I've been working in embodiment and embodying this blueprint, this higher version of who you are, the divine love of who you truly are. It rapidly starts to break apart these identities, these overlays, as you start to literally breathe that power back into yourself and allow what's not you to literally show up, be pushed out into your awareness. So it's not locked in the cells as a kind of anchoring, so that what happens is you begin to be able to anchor in that infinite part of yourself, not the trodden known aspects of you.
Right. So let's say a man doesn't have the money to go to therapy. What are some of the basic practices he can do today at home where he is now?
So again, it's taking a breath in and counting to 5. And then on the exhale, counting to 5. And so that very act of taking control of your breath, regulating the breath, shows the parts of you that you're not in control of, that you're taking charge. There's a sense of agency here, that within the vulnerability of the being that feels out of control, that feels emotionally in pain, that feels finding it difficult to regulate, feels perhaps a victim of financial or emotional circumstances, that as you start to begin to still and say stop to the overstimulation of breath, the shallow breathing, that there's a place inside you that is taking charge, that you are sovereign, that you're choosing to be there in charge of your breath. Because if you can't be in charge of your breath, you can't be in charge of your emotions, you can't be in charge of your power, your energy, and you can't then start to take responsibility of how you react to your life and the choices that have got you there. So that simple thing. And then the next thing after the breath taking charge will be to notice where your body is in the room. So the discipline of finding physicality in space. I love the artist and the sculptor Henry Moore, because he could see the convergence of space and form. So he did this amazing sculptures that look a bit like Kata. They have this rounded kind of sense of the spirit in physical form. And we are divine beings in physical form. We're divine beings first. And so when you start to breathe and just take charge of yourself through that discipline and notice where you're creating form, then you start to break apart the kind of matrix self, the false image of who you've become, who you've been born into, how you've been conditioned, the traumas, the imprints. They all start to kind of come up to the surface. And you then start to go, wow, I can feel this expansion, this expansiveness inside, that isn't the contraction, that isn't the poverty, that isn't the pain, that isn't the trauma, that isn't. So that no longer is your driver. So your agency of that raw animal power can start to merge with the expansiveness of the timeless inside you. So there's this incredible dance between the timeless and the raw messy, chaotic, unknown humanness. So you're not stuck in an identity, even as a man. It goes beyond just being a man.
Would you say that was a form of meditation?
Definitely. It's a way of doing it that's very so you're drawing everything in. You're drawing your essence into your beingness, your physicality. A lot of meditation is going out. So sending your essence out to recover, to charge up, to recuperate. I did tons of that with, and I hate to bash anything but Reiki, like going outwards and getting this lovely thing. But what that does is it delays this process of really pulling the light into the dark. And if you're pulling the light into the dark, it's scary as hell. It's the central theme of Lord of the Rings is that you take the ring back to the volcano. You take what's been formed and corrupted by all these inherited things and socialized things and poisoned things by goodness knows what's going on in our environments. And then you take it to the hot kind of lava and you melt it back down. And so for me, it takes a lot of courage to breathe your essence back into yourself, because you're going to meet every cellular imprint that isn't the best version of you, the truth of who you are.
That's fascinating, because I started meditating probably about 6 years ago now. And then after 4 months of daily meditation, that was when my writing started coming through. I don't meditate now. It sort of phased out a couple of years ago, and now I just think I'm a walking meditation. But the fascinating thing is what you were saying is that when I meditated, I always meditated inwards. I never went out there. It was always inwards through the heart portal. I didn't even use my third eye. I've just always been about the heart. And so, yeah, really relate to what you said there.
Well, that's why there's a solidity. There's a solidity to you, Gemma, because you've pulled yourself in as a meditation, and now that you're in, you are the walking meditation. See, that's what happens. You become the convergence of the essence, which is very, with many people that I work with, it's very kind of spread out. It's very dispersed. And so if you imagine that's actually your vitality, that's your kind of God essence, and it's become kind of separated from your body. So you're literally, through that discipline of presence, and then almost as a prayer, how can I connect even stronger with this brilliance that I am, this love that I am? It converges into the dark matter, and as it clears out all that programming, you get that higher wisdom. The knowledge to write starts to come out of you.
Yeah, fascinating. Wow. Let's get into sexual polarity, because I know on your little bio on your Facebook, it's something that you said that you teach, counsel, I'm not sure what, but first of all, what is it? What is sexual polarity?
Well, it's an extension. It keeps coming back to this presence. So the more you pull yourself into this presence, and the more you can be real about the messy darkness inside of you, the more chance that you can bring that integrity and that truth to your sexuality. So until that essence is more, I won't work with someone until that essence is anchored inside them. And I've been working so hard to bring that into my own space as well, because it's all very well holding that for others, but it's also living that in alignment with myself. So as you bring your presence back in and get into that discipline of holding your brilliance and your physical self together, then there's a strong core identity that's not collapsing and drawing others' energy into you to be complete. And then not almost giving yourself away to get love, not offering pieces of you away. And when you look at many relationship problems, that's that dynamic. It's like people are drawing someone's power into them. Women who haven't found their own strength, or in polarity called their masculine, their sense of self-regulation. They're drawing sort of strong men, but that creates a domineering kind of narcissism, a sense of being used archetype into them, which will often be in the parent's way of relating, or the way they related to a parent, you know, between mother and father or child. And so that all needs to be kind of sealed up and corrected. And so often if people are in relationships, as they draw back into themselves and start to find that solidity, their partners miraculously start changing because they've changed. And I call it the moon pulling the tide. When a woman changes that place in herself to be more solid, the man starts behaving, because most men adore and love their women. And they're actually being programmed by these deeper kind of currents in people that are so subliminal. It's actually a magnetic pull that's saying to the man, treat me like this, because this is the way I was treated. This is the way I was made. I was made this way, to be treated this way. This is the way that love was done in the house. So that interferes with sex, because the sexuality gets kind of pulled out of shape. And so it's not very fulfilling. So when people are making love, it's not coming from a kind of, it's coming from a trauma bonded place, rather than a place of actually truly being in yourself, meeting someone who can meet you there without invading you or taking from you.
Right. Thank you. Is it, do we attract someone on our, like, say, for example, I don't know, I'm 75% feminine. Am I going to attract someone who's 75% masculine to balance that? How does that work? And what happens if there's two people that are 50-50? Is there sexual polarity, or is it just a friendship?
It's a really good question. So when you say if you're 75% feminine, I mean, I'll give an example. It's better to work with examples than it is with theories. I think I was working with a client, and she's been a highly successful person at global level, like board level, global companies. And she's very used to being incredibly dominant and in her masculine, to take charge, to lead, to be responsible for people, for the provision and directing the provision of companies. And so in her dating life, she takes charge, and she would find men who initially take charge and then get overpowered. They don't see that as a test to still keep in charge. So she would perfectly match with a man who's much more comfortable being led by a strong woman, a strong matriarch archetype. So the more we work on the core wounds of coming into those places where she's afraid to allow a man to lead her because of the trauma that she would go into, it's safer to be in her masculine. And so as we tap into those places and she softens and she finds healing, that it's safe to be vulnerable. It's safe to let a good man to be discerning about the right man to take charge of her on a date, to lead her, to push off her attempts to pay for things. It suddenly, that's a paradigm shift for this lady, because she'd been leading. As soon as the man said, "Oh, I've come to see you and it's so expensive, the hotel," she goes, "Well, I'll pay for the weekend, don't worry." And she's feeling really like starting to dislike him and doesn't know why. And it's really confusing. And so it's the way that I go about. I don't do it as a cognitive shift or even as an emotional shift. I go into those deeper places of allowing that vulnerability in. And it's similar for men, where they've lost their power. They've lost that sense of that place that is just dominant. It just wants to be in charge. It just wants to lead, and that provision to be received, that drive, that strength, that I want to give something of myself. You know, I want to create for her.
Yeah, you touched on a subject I really want to get into, and that's the man paying on the date. Now, of course, there's a lot of controversy around this from both sides. I mean, natural polarity suggests that a man should always pay. Um, what do you say to men who are saying, hey, this is 2022, you know, going halves is perfectly acceptable? Can you explain to men the experience behind this?
Yeah, it's something I've sat with because I've been hearing polarity teachers say it for a number of years. And again, it's about staying centered in yourself. So there, like I said, there are signposts that are truisms, but they're not alive. And it's like staying with what's alive on the inside and always following that. And so for the most part, the masculine archetype is to want to provide. It's provision oriented. And then when that's received, that expands the male and makes him able to provide even more. And that feels horny. And that creates even more energy. And then the woman is able to open further. So at the start of a relationship, when you're establishing polarity, there's not that trust in the provision dynamic. So you're not so sure. She's feeling a bit armored. As a man, you don't know whether this is going to open her to you because you're not in that alignment. So in a way, it's about testing your dominance. And it's testing, is that just something you've learned cognitively? And it doesn't quite feel right inside because you've still got woundings about giving to a woman and not receiving something in return. And it's painful. If you take her on a date and then you don't get any action, or she doesn't want you, or it doesn't lead to something sexual, you're going to feel rejected. You're going to feel emasculated. And so you think, well, I'll just buy the first coffee because then I'll trigger that place. But if you truly are sincere, and that is a woman that you have intuited through your masculine, that bit's activated, you're going to want to do that. You're going to want to do that until you break it, until you see, actually, I'm paying for this woman, and actually, I'm not attracted. You know, I've really enjoyed it, but now it's time to stop because there isn't that chemistry, there isn't that dynamic. So you haven't lost anything in paying. You've actually confirmed and strengthened that ability to clear out any wounding that's like, oh, I feel rejected. Oh, I feel like a bit abandoned. And you go, well, actually, she's not sincere. Or I'll call her out on that. Hey, we were out on a date, and then you went, you know, someone else asked you if they could buy you a drink. And I should have said no. You know, you're my girl. I'm out on a date with you. And so it brings that vulnerability in so that you can start to, rather than just be stuck in a cognitive model, you can start to see how that touches your wounds, touches those places inside that need kind of airing. So everything starts to get really dynamic, and you can bring that vulnerability in as well. Say, oh, I felt really like put out by that. I felt really, I felt really small when you didn't accept my invitation for a drink, but then you took it from another guy. You know, and then you just start to become conscious of what's really happening and how to share it in a way that's not weaponized, that's not blaming, that's not saying you're bad or you're wrong or you did this to me, but this was just my experience of what happened when you did that. And then quite often what I've been finding in my relationships where I'm bringing this in is that the other person's got this whole set of wounding things that's a perfect match, and it starts to illuminate where your wounds are entangling up. And so what started off as, do men always buy, you know, always pay, there's always something vulnerable and deeper to it than that. And then you can see that one of the things that I'm really excited by is that when you get past these clunky things of the kind of adulting, there's that childlike innocence where you find suddenly that there's places where you're a team, that you're not in polarity, you're in a kind of two children playing. And when it gets all very polarized, you lose the fun. because you're trying to be this role of this man and she's trying to be this role of this woman, and you lose that childlike playfulness that creates the juiciness. And then it doesn't matter who's, well, it doesn't, it's like, it's not about that.
Yeah, I was just going to say the next question coming up is within a relationship, an intimate relationship, can polarity flow? You know, like, can there be this sort of, you know, sometimes the woman is more in her masculine and the man is more, I guess, softer in his vulnerability, and vice versa. And of course, I know it can, but how would you consider a healthy relationship, one that is fluid or one that is mainly polarized to a certain, you know, the man in his masculine and a woman in her feminine?
I think relationships that are fluid, I don't want to make that wrong for anyone who's in that, because certain people might do that gender fluid playing out in their relationship, and that might actually work for them. But for me, as I've anchored a stronger core, I can do some fluidity where, say, the woman is holding me to account on something, or she's pointing out something that I would expect from another man to point out, but she's in her masculine, she's pointing something out. I don't go, "Oh, you can't do that. I'm in the masculine role," you know, or encourage that. But what I notice is that that's valid and that's great, but there comes a point where I'm responsible for that, and I don't want her to take responsibility for my growth, because then she's moving into more of a male leading and dominance. So I would just very gently and very lovingly lead her out of that. And
Yeah,
that then is
yeah,
spice. It's like spice within the spice. It's I can receive it graciously because it's beautiful, but I wouldn't, again, like, make it wrong. But again, I might even use my vulnerability and say, hey, this is great, but now I need to do the rest on my own, because
yeah,
I just don't want you to be my coach or my mum.
yeah, yeah,
And it's starting to feel like that. And she go, oh
yeah.
my God, yeah, I used to do that so much. Oh, it's my job. And she goes, oh my God. And then and then it just beautifully flips back when you do have these signposts that help with the authenticity. And so you're just following that inner piper. You're never led by what your coach told you or what the system told you. You're always allowing that flexibility. But signposts are good. That's what they're there for.
Yeah. You brought up emotions, and this is another thing, conversation that's always, you know, very juicy in the polarity community. A man talking about his emotional state or showing emotions to his woman. Um, what does that look like in a healthy relationship? When does it get to be too much? And what could a man who is dealing with a lot of emotions do instead of maybe taking it fully out on his woman?
I think that's the polarity between the difference between vulnerability and emotionality, and then the opposite spectrum of agency and control and domineering. So, like I said, like, if your vulnerability is just, sometimes it's raw and it's just there, and you say, I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now. It's human to human, isn't it? It's like, the woman, how can the woman think that's wrong?
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, and they say, oh, you know, if you do that, she'll have no respect for you. Some of these polarity teachings, it's like bullshit. Come on, bullshit. It's
Okay.
okay to be a human being that's not constricted by this polarity straitjacket.
Mhm.
But by the same token, I think what the men who created those systems for is, when the man's going, oh, I'm really overwhelmed, it's every bloody 10 minutes. It's like, that's
Yes.
not appropriate. That's kind of like something that belongs in those sharing groups where that's the code of the currency of communication. It's like nothing's ever threatening and everything's always authentic, and it's the death to polarity,
Yes.
because using his breath, taking charge, finding out where he is in time and space with his body, and marshalling that vulnerability and seeing why he feels overwhelmed, and not looking to mummy to hold that space for him in her strong masculine. So as you start to see, oh God, no, oh God, I get it, how it works. He starts to sort of go, right, I feel overwhelmed. I can state that because it's lovely to just be seen in that. And then, shit, this goes far deeper. I'm in a lot of chaos. I think I need help. I can't bring that to a woman or a relation, any relationship, even a friendship, to load that into a friendship and expect someone to hold you and coach you and move you through that. That's putting on a lot into a friendship. I think that's where you need professional support. And there are I have some friendships where we agree that we will coach each other, and that's part of an agreement for our betterance. And I think those are beautiful, and those are between men, where men can do the men's work together, and that is part of a strengthening of leading each other.
Yeah, I'm interested in, would you say it's better for, if a man is seeking therapy, to go to another man as a therapist to, find his natural masculinity?
I think there comes a time when a man has to ask himself, why have I always seen female therapists? What is it that I'm avoiding in a man? For me personally, I found it's not always men who do this. I've met some women who do this, but a man is naturally more, can be more logical and inquiring through questioning and through that penetration of asking penetrating questions, challenging questions that aren't necessarily about the emotional holding in the same way. Like a woman might, not all, and again, it's making generalizations, might be more oriented towards being more maternal, more holding, more wanting to hear about the man's vulnerability. But the man might challenge another man and say, why do you do that? Can you see how that's a destructive trait? So they might be more leading in their questioning, or might ask difficult and painful questions that would trigger a man to feel that father figure projection, where there's unresolved pain of being crushed by the father, where the father wasn't interested in their feelings and just told them how to be, or wasn't interested in the man's passions and squashed it and said, you should be an accountant or a lawyer, like my dad did when I wanted to be a professional soccer player, football player. And it's like, so when a man tries to lead me, it would bring up this sense of being dominated and controlled, and not having my needs interested or my passions validated. So I think when I'm working with men, it's that balance between challenge and validation, and also accessing that child like portal towards the more powerful, darker beast energies, that will start to show where they're trapped in collapse or addiction, or they're just completely dispersed. So there are these different levels of working with men.
Yeah,
that a woman
a question
can't
that's
really
fascinating.
do.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, just to finish, like, a woman can't really take a man into those primordial masculine places.
Yeah.
Occasionally she can, but as a general rule of thumb, I think it's better to, it's more conducive when you go into a male therapist or a male coach who knows what it takes to journey through that darkness, the putting the ring back in the volcano to melt it down. That's the place you've got to have been to as a male to hold those initiatory spaces for other men to go through them.
Yeah, it's a question, and hence I think a reason for this series as well. There's a lot of insights that women can give men, but to hear it man to man, I think is a lot more powerful, because I don't know what it feels like to be a man. I've got ideas about men and masculinity, but I'm not a man, so I can't know the complete masculine inner truth. So, hence, I think why this series is so powerful, with men speaking about the masculine journey to men, and of course other women who are wanting to understand, the masculine journey as well. Let's go into and explore little David now. We've done this one completely the opposite, but it's all
I
about
know.
going with the flow. So we've got about 35 minutes left. What was your deepest childhood core wound? What was happening when that was being dug into you?
I don't think there's just one. I think there's a myriad of them. But where can I start? I think
Well, let's do.
formatively,
Sorry, go on.
yeah, the most formative ones, I think, was being told who I was and what I felt was wrong, and being told what, I had a gift to channel information very young. I could bring in wisdom as a 3-year-old, way beyond my years. So that was kind of risen up. But then my childlike vulnerability was kind of bulldozed. And there was an attempt to layer over parental emotional overlays and expectations of behavior, and a breaking down of my boundaries with to access me in my essence. So there was like an annihilation of self, I guess, that was very, dispersing. So and yet a building up of something else, a trait of mine, to be very aware of the kind of messages from Creator as a kind of power with a lot of ego around that. So that was a very formative shaping, and not a lot of feminine attention from my mum, not a lot of mothering of my feelings, not a lot of compassion towards my vulnerability, a kind of hard shaping. So that was quite a formative experience that was, that really did a number on my core self, on my sense of who I was.
So this little 3-year-old bringing through this divine wisdom, was that suppressed? Was it because your parents weren't open to spirituality, or because they were fearful of what you were bringing through, or they didn't
Yeah.
acknowledge it?
Well, no, that wasn't suppressed. The wisdom was encouraged,
Oh, okay.
because my dad was able to use it in his business,
Oh, wow.
and he used to tell me his problems, and I'd solve them and counsel him in
At
his
3.
business. Yeah, from that age onwards, I was bringing knowledge through, and advice and guidance.
Can you remember a specific example?
Yeah, it took me to see a unit to rent when I was about 3 or 4. And he said, "What do you think of this, son?" And I said, "Don't take it. There's not the footfall, not the people who are going to come and buy things. There's no people around anywhere." It was just, how would a 3-year-old know that? And it just, for some reason, and there was a few other things. It wasn't obvious to him, but I had this kind of commercial and worldly awareness to have a strong decision, like a strong knowing. And
Wow,
so there were a lot
fascinating. Yeah.
situations like that where he'd tell me a problem, and I'd come up with this way of looking at it that was quite unique, and kind of seemed to make sense. Like, God, that's right. And then so that was like, so I was very bigged up in that respect.
Right.
So it created a sense to go around that
Fascinating.
as my identity, rather than my vulnerability, rather than like being playful, rather than my emotions were not validated. So it was a strange mixture.
Okay, yeah, great. Wow. Let's look at the dynamics between you and your mother. So what you told us earlier, how does that affect a young child, and where did you understand that that wasn't a healthy dynamic?
it meant that I looked to other women for connection, and it became like a fantasy of the idealized mother. And then it within by the age of 5 or 6, it would become like a sexual fantasized image of woman. So that the mothering was around being sexually received by women at a
Right.
very young age. I was
Mm.
wanting to be sexually seen and felt in a sexual way. So it kind of brought on my sexual development very young, wanting to get sexual to kind of get that connection to woman.
That was it to reach the feminine. Now you
Yeah,
can look in retrospect at the masculine and feminine energies, that feminine nurturing softness that you weren't receiving from your mother. You were seeking it through other women, and the easiest way to get it was sexually. Am I
yeah.
understanding correctly? Okay. So did that continue? Was there a point where you healed that? How did that play out?
I think it continued for quite a long time because then my dad introduced me to pornography at a young age. And then just that sense of a distance from my mum and not having that primary connection to love in that way. It was love through very duty bound, like always being there in terms of, cooking and washing, but, those archetypal role based ways, but not in the heart based or being aware if I was being bullied at school, not being a safe haven to share my vulnerability with. So it continued. And I guess I created this identity where I was constantly wanting to date different women, and then I slept around a lot, and then I found a woman that I really fell in love with, and after about a year, I really wanted to make it serious, and in a way, in the same way as I guess I was controlled, and that my dad was trying to control me, her mother was controlling her. So there was like a polarity match now that I look back. And her mum said I wasn't, because I was Jewish, I wasn't Jewish enough for her and wealthy enough for her. So I was good for maybe just the sex and a friendship, but not really to be her man, her husband to be. So that all caught me by surprise. And I think that was such a wounding experience to fall in love so fully with someone and have that connection and then suddenly then pull back and almost sexually turn me into a sexual object and tell me that you're the guy I want to take home, but when I'm out, I want to chat to these other men. And I think it broke my heart, if I'm honest. And I don't think I realized how significant that breach of the vulnerability that I had anyway, in terms of my connection to woman, um, stayed hidden for quite a long time before I was able to really start to confront that kind of betrayal and that sense of disconnect of how the impact that had on me as a man.
Is that the only time you feel you've had your heart broken through a relationship with a woman?
No, there were other times as well. There were two other times, and those also, when I was coming forwards to love, and then that kind of heartbreak of it not being what I thought it was.
Because I know how heartbreak feels for me when a relationship dissolves. Can I get the masculine perspective? What does it feel like? What did it feel like for you as a man?
Well, with that first one, I think when you take the love out of lovemaking, I felt it was completely wrong. So I wasn't interested in actually having sex anymore. And she couldn't understand that because we'd actually had like full on um, like cosmic orgasms together with my first girlfriend. So we were like, I was having a full Kundalini rising, and we were like planetary journeying after with the orgasm and after orgasm, and feeling the electrical bolt moving through my body. And for me, it was like the happiest times of my life, that relationship. And then suddenly for it to kind of collapse in that way, rather than have this conscious communication I've been talking about, saying, hey, what's going on here? I'm feeling really disempowered. I'm feeling really rejected. You're with all these other men. I don't like this. Instead, I was angry. I was immediately felt betrayed. I just did this thing where I cut and said, "It's over then," you know. And I didn't have an ability to hold pain and hold relationship at the same time and manage conflict. There was too much charge. There was too much pain. There was too much of a need to cut and push away. And like a tendency to sever because I couldn't hold my sense of annihilation in that sense of rejection and betrayal and abandonment. It was like the full whammy. So what's been happening over the last few years and the last decade is that slowly building that core self to be able to do that. And then the agony of seeing her wanting to come to me to find resolution, not being able to lead us through resolution, not being able to hold the space and hear her and almost forgive her for her wounding and what her mum was doing to her, and not be able to go through that. It's only something I've been reflecting on in recent years, as I've been learning these skills to really hold myself and to hold the space to lead through conflict when there's been a little bit of a rupture of trust or a seeming breakdown in trust. And so that's really excelled in my personal life, in my personal relationships, and also in the ways that I help clients to navigate those ruptures, those seeming triggers, those betrayals, and where they come from, where they track back to, because sometimes they go back lifetimes, or they're archetypal things that are in a bloodline or in a religious programming that's come through. So it's really fascinating. Sometimes tracking the origin isn't always in your personal experience either. It could go into pattern with your parents, or like I say, beyond.
Is fear of rejection a big thing in the between with the men that you counsel? Is that a recurring theme with wounded men, and how do they overcome that fear?
I could definitely claim that as a wound of mine, rather than maybe I could work from a person-centered place on that. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it shaped my whole personality of avoiding being direct, and it feeds back into being more of a man. Because if you are fully committed to going for something in your life and facing rejection and actually overcoming rejection, because sometimes that's part of the dance, that's part of the sexual mating act. And if you see every little rebuff as a rejection, you miss the goodies and the gold. And I've been a go-getter in my day. I ran telesales teams where it was all about facing rejection in my corporate work. And yet to translate that into relationship is a very different dynamic. But as I've learned about these places in myself, it means I stick around and I'm true. And my passion and my intensity is true. It's not going to kind of, because I found I had to do that, because otherwise there's this splitting into directions. And so it's this consolidation of the masculine essence. It's like it becomes like, and I think that's when you hear men say, I don't need to do the vulnerability as much anymore. And you hear that distortion in some polarity teachings where the men say, I don't do vulnerability anymore. I don't do emotions. I'm just in my masculine all the time. That's an advanced part of the alchemical process of, when you boil a sauce, like a sauce down, it becomes very thick. And it gets thicker and thicker the more you boil it down. And it becomes like, I've forgotten the culinary word for a very thick sauce. You've kind of simmered down to kind of a thick juice. And I think that's, the intense intensity of your masculinity doesn't get distracted. It doesn't get pulled out when a very gorgeous woman walks past and you're with your woman. It doesn't pull. You're not interested in other women, or you're focused on your mission, and distractions come in. You don't get, your essence doesn't get pulled out of you. And so you're not in your wounding. You don't go into your vulnerability so much because you've mapped it out. You've done the feminine. You've shared it. You've cared for it. You've been heard in it, and you've been witnessed, and you've moved it out of you. You've healed it, so that what's left is presence, it's strength, it's containment. And so you move into those more archetypal, masculine, king-like qualities, but you can't shortcut that by learning it to do it cognitively and cheating yourself out of that pathway. I think I see that and I hear that and I feel that far too often in men, where they haven't actually done that deeper consolidation work to really be in that consolidated essence.
Yeah, it's the difference between theory and embodiment, right? Yeah, and everyone knows I say it's 10% theory, 90% embodiment.
Yeah.
Well, you've got such a wide range of knowledge and wisdom. What have we not touched on? That what's your message for men? What else would you like to share with the people watching?
I think tapping into this power, that when you consolidate the wounding and the places of where you're not in the fabric of your being, as men anchor into that fabric, they can start to tap into that fierceness that could only express itself as a wounding or a rage. And as that rage almost loses the extremities, it becomes like this hot sauce inside, this hot fuel, this rocket fuel. And it's how to galvanize that into steady, slow burn power. And I think these are the more advanced stages of the journey. And it's similar for women when they go into deeper and deeper places of presence, and they can open wider and wider. So I work with both men and women, and I do groups for men, and I do mixed groups. And it's like watching how those archetypes kind of tend to lend themselves to different ways of being. So for the men, where they get lost is they tend to think that if they're just vulnerable, that's enough. And that somehow, well, I call it like dumping in the middle. They just dump their vulnerability in the middle of the men's group and expect the group to do the work for them.
Right.
It's just magically to transform. And I think within the New Age, you create a very powerful mastermind or divine. They call in powers and do all sorts of things. And that can work. It's a bit like you pass the parcel of your crap, put it in the middle, and then you take home someone else's crap, and it feels better for a while. You've got someone else's stuff on you, and you're like, wow, I feel great, until you need the next training and the next training and the next sharing workshop and the next weekend, because you're never fundamentally going into this darkness and clearing it for good. And I think that's the difference. Well, I wouldn't say it's the difference. What I devote myself to in my own life is that I don't want to be beating on about the same things 10 years later in a different way. I want to be expanding and growing, yes, and intensifying my abilities and pioneering and evolving into new things. So what I'm doing now might be very different in 10 years' time. And I think for men, it's that because then everything's fresh, but you're consolidating that power, that strength, that grit, that determination, and the ability to hold the stress. And when you can just be that presence with your woman, or with females, or with others who are vulnerable, who might go into emotional chaos, you don't get pulled. It doesn't pull you out. Or when your business is very stressful, or when something disastrous happens, which occasionally it does, that messes everything up, you can use adversity to actually work for you. You can actually stand present in time and space and galvanize anything into opportunity. And that's when you're in that master. I think it's moving into mastery. So like the mastery for a woman is another space, and the mastery for a man It's like that high level optimum working, where you're not just following some cognitive map of high level people, but you've actually metamorphosized that from your own wounding and your own mess. And you need to really get that mess out and not be ashamed of it. So it's working with shame. So many people protect the messiness that's inside them because they're too ashamed. They don't want to show me that they're that messed up on the inside. Particularly advanced healers, particularly very exalted professionals. Initially, if they come to me, it takes a bit of, knocking through those protectors of that deep shame that they're actually powerless in those places. They're not exalted practitioners in those places. And that's what's been really hard for me, is that the more effective I've become in the world working this way, sometimes there's not been a complete congruence between my personal process, where I've needed to go deeper, I've needed to excavate some of this trauma from when I've been younger and really consolidate that and really rebuild the container. Because the bigger you get, the more it amplifies these dark bits inside. And so that's why we've seen so many people in yoga, tantra, growth work, professional growth, be exposed for being corrupt and having these terrible qualities, as well as these amazing qualities. Because as you get more and more successful in your chosen field, if you aren't clean and clearing and purifying the base, it amplifies the nastiness or the unresolved shadow aspects that can get co-opted and become really, really dangerous shadows for other people's well-being.
Definitely, definitely. Love it, love it. David, what would you say is your highest value, your highest masculine value?
I think it's to penetrate to the very essence of what's going on, and then to help to remove it, so that the true essence of someone can then start to replace that and take over their lives for the better.
Thank you. I'm also interested, you mentioned before, and I love this, the way you put this, a container for stress. And I mean, we're all containers for stress at some point. So how does a man deal with stress?
Right. It keeps coming back to the basics. When you're in that breathing and presence state and you're taking full charge of yourself, what you start to notice is where you're leaky and where you absorb others' stress, illnesses, emotions into you. And so the more that you become filled with your own essence and you realize that you don't get anything from taking others' burdens off them, you become a safer sanctuary for others' burdens to drop away, but for them to take responsibility for the trauma underneath and the behavioral patterns, the emotional pattern, and the relationship patterns that are co-creating that stress. And maybe the ancestral archetypes that underpin those behaviors and patterns. So as that gets penetrated by me being sealed and not taking that on, I stop what I call giving people bitty and, mothering them on the titty of nourishment and empathy, which ends up colluding with these deeper structures that are creating that stress. And so if I don't take that stress on and my presence starts to bring them to those places, they can confront the origin of their stress, I guess. But that's not always practical in a relationship. That's a journey where you don't take it on and you become, and it's great for healers, because why would you want to absorb your client's rubbish?
Yeah.
In relationships, why would you want to absorb your partner's rubbish? Well, when we're 3, when we're 5, guess what we do? We absorb all the rubbish out of the environment, out of our parents, because that renders us lovable.
Yes.
And so as we clear those kind of frequencies out of ourselves, those kind of settings in the kind of code of our being, as we access those and clear those out, we get to be kind of like strong containers. And so when others come into our presence, it starts to show them what's inside them that needs to come out. And they can also relax because the frequencies of peace and containment start to reach them and uplift them once that rubbish goes out.
Thank you. Yeah. Would you say that the breathing exercise was the most important practice that you incorporated into your life, or were there any more that we can touch on now in the last 5 minutes?
I did before I did my current training, I did a lot of training to with emotional trauma. And so I think getting on the bed, taking all your jewelry off, your glasses off, and having a good 4-limb tantrum or beating a pillow. I did 7 years working with fire, taking people out into the middle of nowhere and screaming at the fire or crying into the fire and using. See, the thing about nature is it's pure and it's present. Animals are pure and present, and they are what they are. They've not taken on the identity of the diseases of their forebears. They're alive, they're vital, they're literally glowing with spirit, with source energy. And so when you think about fire, if you go and make a fire and share all your burdens into the fire, that's going to start burning up. If you call into that archetype of the fire and work with that, it's like a portal to source, like the mountain behind you, Kata Chuta. It kind of just starts to literally bring it to a higher level so you can release it. So you can also do, punching the air and stamping your feet on the spot. Or I was listening to a chap on your interviews, Ryan, who chops wood, and he puts all that intentionality into chopping wood. There are some really good techniques, and I teach them as well, where you can do some punching techniques and just to move the energy. You're not trying to get rid of the energy completely, because you kind of need to galvanize that energy. You're not trying to like ejaculate it out of yourself, but you want to kind of move your emotional body so you're like inner child, your emotional body, your kind of energetic body around you is activated. And then when you go to breathe, and you're not like sat on a volcano or on a crushed, compressed, you've got some opportunity to bring all into your yoga practice. So you're not just doing yoga for yoga's sake, you're doing yoga to tap into those places and breathe into and embody into the places that are enraged, right, or the places that feel humiliated. So I think once you get that it's about the way that you command your own presence and hold your presence in your body, physical things, dancing, jumping in. I do cold water immersion every morning.
Wow.
It really, it becomes a way of life. It becomes almost like every habit is about regenerating yourself, nourishing yourself, uplifting yourself, getting closer into yourself, until it just becomes everything your life starts to be designed to enhance you. And embody.
Feeling comes to mind when you're feeling your body, feeling the cold water, and of course emotion is energy in motion. So I think especially when we do feel emotionally overwhelmed, to actually physically move our body and start shifting that around so it doesn't get stuck in one place. Does that help? Absolutely. Especially with the men? Yeah,
dancing is so underrated.
Oh yeah, good song. Well, when you've got dancing, you've got the music as well, of course, and there's always the old favorites that make us feel better.
Yeah, don't just get involved with like atmospheric hippie kind of new age music. Get into some good heavy metal, things that you can really mosh, get moshing your head, and really, or some good tribal drumming. really get into moving it in a very positive way. It could be, you know, something more contemporary or something more tribal, but something that really gets the moods moving. You know, learning how to use music for moods can be so important as well. And then
Oh,
coming into that stillness and accessing it when you've moved the system, it can be so much more potent.
definitely.
Mm.
Wow. Well, we've covered so much, and I love how this organically took on a different direction than, you know, the other interviews. But we started straight away tapping into your knowledge and your wisdom, and I just wanted to roll with that. So, David, where can people find you?
So my website is embodied soul awakening.com. EMBODIED soul awakening.com.
Any social media that we
Yeah,
can drop the links to underneath?
I'm also on Facebook, David Stone, and I have an Embodied Soul Awakening page there. Those are my main. That's my main Facebook at the moment. Is my main outlet on my website.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us, your time, your teachings, your experience, certainly a wealth of knowledge. So thank you.
It's been great.
I'll,
Thank you.
my pleasure. I'll say to everyone out there, thank you for being here. If you could if you want to share with anyone that you feel would benefit, would like to listen to David's story, please do. I'll be back in a few days with another episode of Heart Warriors. So bye for now, and I'll see you next time.